So just very briefly, I'll just give a bit of an overview who Royal Flush are. So we're a marketing performance consultancy, which is actually very much data-led. So there's no assumptions, only facts on how to market your business in the most cost-effective way. So if you haven't heard of us, go to our website, check us out, see what you think. There is a lot to take on board today. So please make sure you take plenty of notes. I mean, you will get a copy of this as well, so don't worry if you can't write everything down. As Ian was saying, there's a chat screen at the bottom right hand corner. So if you've got any burning questions, get it in there. Otherwise, we'll just do questions at the end. It's up to you. It's very informal. So this is going to be the intro into branding. So there's lots of things that make up a brand rather than just a logo. So we're going to talk you through all the aspects and all the things to consider. So just very briefly still, a bit of an intro to myself, Ben on the left, me on the right. So Ben has over 20 years in marketing. He initially trained as a graphic designer, then worked his way up to a creative director and then head of marketing. And actually, he's worked for both client side and agency side, so a good rounded mix of everything what goes on. But Ben's real interests are like the data behind the creative. As I've said, it's not just jumping on a Mac and producing something really eye-catching. And essentially he's looking to make better connections to the customer. So the human to human contact, what makes them tick, how do they align to your business? So really questioning everything, really to understand the full picture and get a perspective for the businesses that we work with. Myself, I've had over 15 years in sales and marketing. So I work for various businesses, from the small to the large, to the very good, to the very bad, unfortunately. But actually, I met Ben at a full service marketing agency a number of years ago, and I was in charge of the business development. Me and Ben worked really closely together, developing pitches and pitching ideas to clients. And after a number of years, we created a new service really to help our clients understand their customers and create a better marketing experience, to do two things really. Number one, increase customer retention, and number two, create more cross-selling opportunities. Too many businesses were just churning clients and they weren't utilizing all the services. So as a full service agency that we worked with, we offered PR and social media and web design and branding, but often would only sell one thing in. So there was a lot of wasted revenue opportunities. We developed this service to increase those type of things. So it worked so well. After a few discussions, we said, why are we doing this for somebody else? We should do it ourselves. And Royal Flush was born. So that's us. Here's just a quick snapshot of some of our clients. So they range from the very small startups to the SMEs to the £100 million turnover blue chips. We work across both B2B and consumer. Interestingly enough, all of the businesses that we tend to work with have very similar issues, where there's not much of a plan going forward. They're missing out on opportunities of how to increase sales, retain those clients and cross-sell. And putting that plan in place for all of them has really assisted them. So we work across loads of sectors, and we can do, because we don't pretend we know a particular business. We come into a project with a blank canvas, but immerse ourselves with the data to give the best possible outcome. So that's us really. Let's get stuck in. Ben's going to kick us off on why brands do better with a personality.
Thanks, Andy. So according to Acre and the Journal of Marketing, there are 5 different types of brand personality. And the way and the reason that they do better is what we're going to discuss and give you a few tips on over the next hour or so. So when we think about these different types of personality, they're across the top there: sincere, excitement, competence, rugged, and sophisticated. And you can probably think of some brands that fall under those categories now, but we're going to use well-known people to try and illustrate the point for you. So it's information really that helps us determine how we perceive a person or a brand. So we'll have a visual aspect. There'll be the context. There'll be the tone of voice, what we know about them and what they say. And ultimately, their actions are really how we start to make a decision on someone's personality. Take, for example, Vicky Fiona. You may be familiar with this. Fiona was an anti-Trump protester, and you can see she's clearly very sincere about how she feels in that particular situation, to the point where she's actually become a famous meme that has gone viral and is used all across the internet on social platforms and beyond. And the word that is associated with her is actually triggered. It's a negative portrayal of that particular person based on very little information, just a visual aspect. When we look at someone like Emma Watson, we've got someone that's very smartly presented. That's the presentation side of it, the visual. In context, she was at the UN conference, so she was speaking at a place of, high authority. She portrayed herself very well. She gave a really good account of herself. She spoke very clearly. She was very calm. She spoke with aplomb. And what she had to say was very, justified. It was very fair and it was very well put across. So her actions help us build this feeling that Emma Watson is somebody that would feel more affection to than possibly somebody like Fiona that we've got very little information for, except a particular snapshot of a particular point in time. We've got no context surrounding it. So you've got a negative and a positive portrayal of a person. And it goes across the board. John Gotti, a gangster, a mob boss, lived an exciting but illegal and criminal life, as opposed to someone like Bear Grylls, who lives the exciting life. Yes, he's got some elements of jeopardy in there, but he's the chief scout. He's put across as a great character. So again, we're probably more drawn, if we had the choice between the two, to Bear Grylls than someone like John Gotti, unless you're a gangster. Then you've got people like Sir Philip Green, clearly a highly competent businessman, knighted, owner of BHS, but also somebody who took the pension away from his team. He stole the pension and then he ran off abroad, as opposed to someone like Richard Walker, who inherited Iceland or became the MD of Iceland, replacing his dad, and eradicated single-use plastic, modernized Iceland and brought them into the 21st century. Again, with rugged, you've got Paul Golding, leader of Britain First. He's a big chap. You wouldn't want to get into a tumble with him. But at the same stretch, he comes across as that divisive, some would say fascist, as opposed to Tom Hardy, who's played criminals, who's played fighters, has got this rugged look to him. He's a lady's favourite. But then you can also see him reading children's bedtime stories on CBeebies. And finally, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Can it get any more sophisticated than wearing a top hat and tails? Yeah, George Clooney. He gives a lot more of a sophisticated look. Jacob Rees-Mogg would arguably come across as quite slimy and slippery. So the information that we have around the visual context gives us a lot of a feeling about a particular person. It's the same with brands. These individuals are a brand in their own right. And a brand that you portray out there is much more than just a logo. It's the communication that you use. It's the messages that you put out there. It's the way you talk and it's the way you present yourselves. And that's what we're going to discuss over the next hour or so. So over to you, Andy.
Thanks, Ben. So let's take a look at the data behind the brands. So we know that data proves that customers engage with brands that have a personality. So it's all about thinking about your customers first. What do they want in a brand? Incidentally, we've got loads more on this, but we've just condensed it down. We didn't want to overwhelm you, but a lot of this data come from the BIPC. So, the really good guys to get on board with, and it just demonstrates the power of information that is available out there. So check it out. But essentially it's really important to have a good understanding of the different generations. So we'll go through them all just to give you an overview from left to right. So first up, the Gen Zs or Zs, depending on where you're from. So it's the 7 to 25-year-olds. If that doesn't make you feel old, I don't know what will. These guys are now starting to have children. They're actually becoming quite a significant buyer group, again, especially at the older age of Gen Z. They're quite socio-political, so they're interested in the environment, world issues. They're interested in topical issues. In terms of reviews, they're very big on reviews and peer influence. You know, that they follow celebrities, but they don't get sold to by celebrities. They'd much more trust an expert vlogger over a celebrity any day of the week, and they actually buy from those expert opinions. Their loyalty is sits somewhere in the middle of you know, towards brands, but brands got to have authenticity, so it's got to provide them with something that resonates with them. They are quite anonymous as a group, so they don't share their personal information out there, but these, you know, they're a big group to consider, so don't dismiss them. Then we get onto the millennials, so the 26 to 40s. So there's lots of variance with these guys. They're actually fast becoming the biggest consumer group out there, so it's something to watch out for. Their loyalty is higher than the generations. They sit the medium to high side of things. And they actually they look at more influencers than any other group. So this is, if this is your particular remit or your particular generation that you're targeting, influence is a really big thing for them, especially influencer marketing. So they also buy from influencers, they trust them, and to a certain extent they are influencers themselves. So you've got to remember, this was a group that was pre-smartphone, so they remember the world before digital, but actually are digital natives as well. And with their age spread, they you know, across the generations, they tend to have a foot in every camp. So essentially, these guys are your immediate future group. Then we get on to the Gen X's, the 41 to 55. So these are the current reigning champs, actually. So that these are your biggest consumer group as it stands. It's, you know, being narrowed by the millennials, they're catching them up, but they're actually pushing towards that boomer group as well, which we're going to touch on in a second. You know, they're getting on a bit. So these guys remember a time before the internet, but they've started to adopt technology. They still have traditional tendencies, and traditional media is a big area for them. And these guys look for quality, you know, in products and services, and they've got actually high loyalty if you can nail those certain things. And obviously, the more financially wealthier as a group, and they tend to buy, you know, the higher end products. And then finally, the boomers. So these guys are less influential online, but don't overlook them because it's still a huge market to go at. In terms of, you know, the marketing side of things, they are less interested because they're more traditional in terms of marketing. So they don't tend to buy from digital. They research a lot to find their information, and we know from the data that it's search engines is where they get their information from. But they are embracing social media, and on the whole, they do use Facebook quite a high amount, and they've started to get in YouTube as well. In terms of loyalty, it's quite low on the scale, but they will buy certain things if it resonates with them. So they look for like best offer, own brand. They like free delivery, really resonates with them, and promotions, that type of thing. And because these guys are money conscious. So in terms of marketing campaigns, they are less influenced because they're a bit more skeptical. So if you were thinking of perhaps pushing a paid Facebook ad towards them, then it might not resonate as much as a traditional TV ad would. But it's really, really important to understand all the different audience groups and just you know, paint a picture, because that's going to be your key to your branding and how you align to them. So all of the above info gives you loads of different messages to choose from, and how you put out these messages to your specific target audience.
Thanks, Andy. I'm going to give you some examples now of how brands can demonstrate personality. A lot of this is all very consumer driven. So to any of the B2B side that might be listening out there, we're using this because it's generally a bit easier to tell the story, to bring it to life. And there are all of the things that we're going to talk about still have exactly the same applications in the business world. So let's start with Patagonia. If anyone who doesn't know Patagonia, it's an outdoor clothing brand. started by surfer and general outdoorsman Yvon Chouinard back in the 70s. He was a bit of a hippie. He was a mountaineer and a rock climber and a surfer, and you'd see him all over the place, from mountains to forests to lakes and rivers and oceans. And to that extent, of course, he really considered the environment and was very keen to protect it so that he could continue to do what he does for himself and for other generations. And as a brand, they're quite high end. People know them as Patagucci in the outdoor industry. But they very much live and breathe this, the brand values about being environmentally considerate. And they do a lot of initiatives as part of this. So they do things like worn wear, where they actually encourage you. There was an advertising campaign saying, "Don't buy this jacket." And the small subtext to that was, "Unless you really need it." They have a road show that travels around different countries, going to Patagonia stores, where they encourage people in the area to bring in their worn out wear, and they'll fix it for them, even if it's not a Patagonia garment. So people will turn up queuing around the block with wetsuits and waterproof jackets and all sorts of stuff, that they have a small team that will do some repairs for them. And of course, this is bringing a lot of people to the shop at the same time. On Black Friday 2017, they actually came up with an idea where, instead of giving 1% to the planet, which is their normal initiative and gives $1 million a year to environmental charities and initiatives that are there to protect, they actually decided to give 100% for the planet. So all of the sales on Black Friday 2017 would go directly to their For the Planet initiative. And they expected to do about $2 million. They actually did $10 million on that one day. And as a result, for the following 2-week period, they noticed that sales were up also. So by doing these things, by putting this incredible set of initiatives together that really bring the brand to life, they increase custom, they increase reputation. They've branched now into farming. Yvon decided that he didn't like the way that mass cattle farming was doing, contributing so much CO2 to the atmosphere. So he started to branch out into other areas to try and see if he can solve those problems. So what we're saying here is that, you know, in terms of brands, you can do all kinds of things that can be part of your branding. It's much more than just a logo. Andy.
Thanks, Ben. So here's another example of a company that was really built on their brand. And I'm sure you've all heard of Innocent. It was two guys who basically started this at a festival, giving free smoothies out. And to a point, anyone, you know, you could do this. If you've got a blender and you've got a load of fruit, you can make them yourselves. But really, as I've said, what made these guys was their brand personality. And they built their brand based on a number of things: innocence, simplicity. They're quirky. You can see, you know, in the picture on the right, just little things like "stop looking at my bottom," just little bits of detail there. They were charming, and they put loads of details throughout. And actually, what did really well for them was the fun campaigns. Just yesterday, I'll get onto the campaign they do shortly, but just yesterday they were all over social media because there was a rumor spread about them about a couple of weeks ago, about they were doing smoothies made of toast and a full English breakfast, and they've just embraced it and you know, aligned that to their target audience and just had a laugh about it. But I don't know if you remember, a couple of years ago they brought out a new smoothie, a blue smoothie, and there was mixed messages all over the internet to say it's not blue, it's green. And they had this big debate, which was a lot of fun. And then they went and got Duncan from Blue, if anyone remembers Blue from, I think it was the noughties. I know Ben's a big fan. And they got him in just to put him in a spoof video to say it is blue, and they're really just taking the mickey out of him. And it just really resonated with their target audience and brought the brand to life. And as I've said, they're a fun, quirky brand, but it just got their brand exposure out there to the masses. And it's a really good example of what you can do. And actually, they did so well that Coca-Cola come along a couple of years ago and bought them for 100 million. Unfortunately, they then filled it with sugar, so it's not that innocent anymore, just in case you didn't know. But it's a good point to make. When you're building a brand, think differently. Think about your customers and think about what do they want to hear. If you can appeal to their values, you're well on your way. And if you have a clear picture of what you want to do and you make it as easy as possible, then you'll stand a better chance of converting them into customers.
So how do you build a brand? There's a lot of components to it, which we're going to break down for you now. You might be thinking, well, yeah, that's all well and good, but Innocent have got millions of dollars behind them, or, Coca-Cola have been around for years and they've built this massive, massive brand with lots of budget and marketing and so on. But actually, all of these brands started where all of us are, at the beginning, and they're small at that point in time. It's not necessarily the case that they have millions of pounds or dollars to be able to spend. So it's all about setting out your intentions, looking at how you can be better than your competitors, more appealing, easier to progress with, those kind of things. So let's have a look at the anatomy of a brand. You've got three major components to this: personality, presentation, and communication. Personality are the kind of things where this is who we are, this is what problem we solve, this is what we're setting out to achieve and how we do our work or sell our products or services. We've got presentation, which is the formal things like logos, colours, the imagery that we use. And then we have communication, and that's the kind of messages that we put out there and the tone of voice that we use, the way that we converse and communicate with people, from shops to offices, on the phone, on the internet. It doesn't matter. It's all how that communication comes across. We're going to break this all down for you. So when we think about personality, it starts really at the ground level, what you're trying to do, and understanding where you position what you're trying to do. Doesn't matter whether it's right at the high end like Louis Vuitton or right at the low end like Home Bargains, where they're selling end of line and pallet ends close to sell by dates. You can still make a ton of money, as you can see. Last year, Home Bargains was worth £3.59 billion. Louis Vuitton was worth $53 million. So it doesn't mean that high end necessarily means more money. And wherever you are, whether you're in the middle, low middle, high middle, it's about considering your audience, considering your price, and positioning yourselves appropriately. Whenever I used to take on graphic designers, particularly if they were just out of university, what I would often find was that they'd come into the studio and they'd want to try and make everything as trendy as they could. There was a real hipster thing, which is a recurring theme that will come up throughout this, where people wanted to make things look really hipsterish, or they want to put a moustache on something, make it a little bit more stylish than maybe it needed to be. And they'd kind of approach this thing with their own style. And what I'd often say to them is, you've got to think really carefully. You can't make Home Bargains look expensive. If you do, then something's going to jar. It might not necessarily be that people are going to be able to articulate that, but they just won't resonate with them. And as a result, you'll notice that in the sales. So as a designer, we have to think about things in context of what's appropriate. It's all about being a commercial artist rather than being a fine artist. And that means you do what you're being paid for, what the client requires and what their audience is looking for. So position yourself appropriately. Don't try and be super high end if you're not. Embrace where you are and make the most of it.
Thanks, Ben. So essentially, branding starts from within. If we look at vision, mission, and values, these three things are really easy to confuse, and many businesses and many people do that very same thing. There's a number of questions that you have to ask, and which is things like, what kind of company do you want to be? Who are you as a business, and what problem do you solve? Ben just mentioned earlier about Home Bargains. Are you a volume company? Are you stack them high and sell them cheap? Or are you premium? So, it's expensive but worth it. Are you innovators? So are you bringing a new product or service that no one's done before? Or could be considered a Me Too brand? Do you copy innovation but make it affordable? Or finally, are you a disruptor? So are you taking something out there and really challenging the market? Are you making a splash? There's loads of things to consider, but let's take a model that's been around for years. the circus, Gandhi's circus. We're all, well, I'm sure we're all familiar. We've all been to one of these things. It's, you know, a mouldy old big top in a field, load of animals, load of acts like the fantastic Flying Flanagans, or an old clown, you know, potentially a strong man. And the tickets for stuff like this, £7 to £15, something like that. And there's loads of these touring throughout the UK, all doing the same thing. You know, they're quite old fashioned, outdated, I'd say. You know, how do you change that up as a brand? How do you modernize it? How do you make it bigger? How do you make it better? How do you make that circus that's been around for that many years more profitable? Well, these guys come along, the Cirque du Soleil. So they essentially took that traditional boring old model and took it to the next level. They shook it up, they modernized it, they brought it into the 21st century. If we look at the old circus model, what did they do? So first of all, they had a load of animals, and they were high cost, you know, to buy the animals, to maintain them, to transport them around the UK. And then they had their acts. And what they tended to do is have one superstar and then a lot of other acts who are a lot lesser to them, building up to the big finale. You know, they've got a cheap tent. The tickets, as I've said already, were low cost. So for the old model, it was high cost for them to maintain this. It was a lot of effort, but it was low profits. So if we compare that to what the Cirque du Soleil did and how they positioned themselves, well, first of all, they got rid of their animals. They were just too expensive, too divisive, you know, cruelty to animals and all that. Instead of having a number of smaller acts building up to the big finale, they made all the acts the headline artists, and they were fantastic in their own particular way. They had, you know, they still got state-of-the-art big tops, but then they progressed to arenas. So, you know, they're much warmer for the audience, much more comfortable, the bigger. So as a result, you can get more people in there. You can charge a higher ticket price, and it really is worth it, especially because you've got the added value things like the audio visual side of things. They had, you know, state of the art laser shows, and you know, they brought live bands into the acts, and really, you know, with the old model, once you've seen the old circus model, you've seen them all. With the Cirque du Soleil, you haven't seen them all, because they started to create different themes and stories, and it just enabled people to keep coming back, because every time they came back, it was a new thing that they hadn't seen before. So they significantly increased their value offer. They increased their profitability because people kept coming back and they could charge more. It's the same thing, but they thought differently, and they thought, how can we shake this up? And essentially, they've revolutionized the industry, and that's proven because they're, you know, a multi-million turnover business now, operating throughout the world, not just, you know, per country.
So you've got an idea of what you want to do with your company, and that's where the branding really starts from within. You've established what your brand wants to be, your vision, your mission, your values, and now it's time to package that up and present it to the world. So whether you've already an existing company or not, whether you're a new company, there's a whole thing about naming, and it might be that you've already decided on your name. It might be in a few years' time, though, that you want to introduce a new product or a new service. And a lot of people get hung up on a name. So we'll give you a few different examples here. You can have a quirky, memorable name like Google, or perhaps you go something more descriptive for search, like appliances online. Or maybe you go for something emotive like we just saw with Innocent a few moments ago. Or maybe you go down the more traditional route of A and B marketing. There used to be a time in the yellow pages where people would be A1 electrical, so they'd be the first listing that people would see. Making a name for yourselves is what you make of it. Often at the beginning, it can feel a little bit jarring. It doesn't quite sit because it's new. But it's all the branding that surrounds it that starts to build the name. It's the things that you do, the actions that you take, the trade that you do. And familiarity makes it stick in that respect. Recently, I think it was 2017, Formula One changed its logo that it had had for about 25 years. And when they changed it to the new logo, there was absolute uproar. In fact, Lewis Hamilton even got up and started protesting against the new logo, and an angry mob formed behind him across social media. But what happens inevitably is that people get used to it. And then after a while, what they often find is that actually, yeah, maybe the old logo does look a bit dated now, and they've got used to the new logo, and actually they start to like it. So don't be afraid to do a brand refresh. Don't be afraid to do those things. There's a lot of activities that you can do that surround it that overtake that initial change that we famously hate, and make it feel more familiar and make it feel okay again. So if you're coming to choose a name, it's all about the context that goes around it. Let me give you an example. So what's the first thing that pops into your head when you see Oasis? Oasis could be a band. It could be, if you're from a certain age or a certain era, Oasis really defined a generation with Britpop. They were massive. They were everywhere, on the radio, in the press, on the television, advertising, in the record stores. Wherever you went, all you heard was Oasis for a certain period of time. And many people, if you say Oasis, that's what they'll think of straight away. It may be that you've got kids, or you're from a younger audience, or perhaps you just love sugary drinks. And if that's the case, Oasis might bring up this particular brand. So it's about thinking about what the context is here. Perhaps if you're a female, you've got all your clothes for going out on a weekend from the retail fashion house, Oasis. So it might appeal to you from that sense. Or if you're a florist, you might even think of this green foam that you can use to arrange your flowers. There's a lot of different ways that a name can particularly infiltrate your world in terms of the context that it's used in. Whenever we ask this question, there's always somebody who gets it, and somebody actually says a waterhole in the desert, thinks about the true meaning. But how often do you come across a waterhole in the desert in the UK? It's not familiar to us. It's not in context. We're not exposed to this kind of thing. We don't have the requirement to find water. It's something that we can just get on tap. So when you think about branding, we're trying to expand you from that idea of it's just a logo and help you think about all the different components that create it. But let's talk about logos for a moment. Give you a potted history just for a moment. You could have all kinds of different types of logos, and I'll come to that in a moment. But one of the earliest representations of a logo is from the stonemasons. And what they do is they put chisel marks in a particular pattern into the stone to say where their work began and where their work ended. So if you think of a stonemason working on something massive like a cathedral or a castle, they'd want to be able to show that their work was of a certain quality. They might be working next to someone that's maybe not as good quality as them, and they don't want to be judged on the work that's adjoining their own. So they put the stamp in at the start, they put the stamp in at the end, and then when they could show the boss when they came round, they knew exactly what they were looking at in context with the craftsman. And that went on to become that Masonic secret handshake. If they were getting paid at the end of the week, they would form a big queue, walk up to the bookkeeper and shake his hand in a particular way, and that would identify them as whether they were an apprentice, a journeyman, or a master craftsman, and they would get paid according to the type of handshake. And of course, it's not in their best interest to share what that is, so that other people of a lesser standard could get paid the same. Then when we go on to the signet ring, this is a much more recognizable mark. It would usually be a crest or a symbol that would represent a family or a house or a dignitary. And it was used as an identifier to stamp into the wax so that they would know it had officially come from them. It would form a seal. And that's how the logo started to create a more strong sense of identity in that respect. It became more graphical. And then we've got the signage side of things, where they might use a name to represent a building so that employees knew where to come, or people knew to come here for trade. And then that became an advertising space in itself. So we started to see typefaces becoming more decorative. We started to see people using the name and changing the way the font is, as you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. The point here is this is an identifier. It's something that you use so that people recognize your brand, but it's not every part of branding. Don't try and get everything into your logo. If you do lots of different products and services, it's not essential that the logo does all the talking. There's other tools that we can use to bring those things in. What we're trying to do is represent the brand, put it under this identifier, and it should have a bit of brand personality in there, but it isn't required to do everything. And that's when you get overly complicated brands that people don't understand. Andy.
Thanks, Ben. So now you've got a name, you've got a logo design. Let's have a look at color. So what are the typical colors and what do they represent? So we won't go through all of them, but just let's take a few of them. So red, you know, it's a confident color, excitement, strength, love, energy, that type of thing. It can also mean warning. So, you know, it probably is not best or not commonly used in the financial sector. So if you're a wealth manager or an accountant, you know, it could, might not always, but it could put people off just how they visualize it. But as I've said, it can also mean excitement. I mean, if we look at Virgin, Richard Branson, for example, he's very much a disruptor. If you're thinking danger and do I really want to get on one of his planes at 30,000 feet, you know, that could have been a consideration to him. But as I've said, he's a disruptor, so he really wasn't bothered about that. He knew what he wanted to do. So, you know, just because it could mean something doesn't mean you have to go through with it. You know, if we look at the greens and blues, they're probably most commonly used in the financial sector. You know, you've got the trust, loyalty, competence. Or then we can look at the pinks. So it's quite a feminine colour, but you know that may change as gender broadens and blurs. We've actually just done a reskim of our website and we've dotted it throughout just because it felt right for our brand. And then you got the classics, the black and white. So essentially it lets the images do the talking. It's sophisticated. So it's really important to think about your brand and what colour it represents. If we get onto the next slide, we've got 10 brands here and we've taken the colour out. Let's just play a quick game. Let's see how many you can get. Either write them down and just let us know in the chat box how many you get. I think I did it the other day. I think it was 7. Just give you 30 seconds to have a ponder.
Go on. Have we got anyone in the chat that wants to throw out a number of how many they've got?
7. David.
Who's got 7? Anyone else? 2 from Stuart. 2. 6 from Emma. 7 from Darcy.
8. Sally, you're doing well.
It's pretty good at this game. I bet you've got the logo game at home. And Cheryl. Okay, let's try and see if we can increase those scores for you.
Yeah. So I can imagine there's a big sigh going, oh, of course it was that. So
Carol's by 2 there.
Yes, Darcy.
Get in.
Well,
that's our first full marks. Anyone else? Stuart, have you gone down? Oh no, 1.
Right. So wait for Jeanette. 8 now. Yeah. So it just goes to show that it's easier with colour. And for the ones you didn't get, you'll probably be kicking yourself. There was a couple of hard ones in there, to be fair. But just, colour can mean a lot, essentially.
Okay, well, look, you've got the answers now. Hopefully that was a little bit of fun. Let's have a look at typefaces. So typefaces are types of font, and fonts are specifically designed by an artist. And so we've got different types of typefaces here. Traditional, modern, hipster, novelty, quirky. There's lots of other ones as well. But it's really important when you think about choosing a typeface for your brand, the kind of typeface that you use. Imagine if you're a financial company and you use a novelty font. It's not really going to sit comfortably, is it? You want probably something more along the traditional and modern lines. It's about choosing what's appropriate. Unless you want to be a disruptor, of course, and in that case, maybe you want to go for something novelty. It has been done before. But you've got to think also in terms of how often you want to update this. I mentioned hipster earlier. It's been a real trend for about 5 years now. But in a couple of years, it's probably going to look really dated. And if you chose that kind of typeface and that kind of presentation, is that something that maybe you're going to have to change in a couple of years? Are you going to feel like, yeah, this looks really out of date now? So there's different ways that we can use typefaces, but when we're applying it to a brand, it might be that we use it for an advertising campaign or some marketing, but actually maybe we want something that's a little bit more classic, maybe not quite as adventurous when it comes to our main brand itself. Think about Coca-Cola. They've not changed their brand in years, neither have Guinness. But then companies like Next, they've changed from that traditional serif font, uppercase, to a sans serif, lowercase font. So they've gone more modern. And sometimes there's a bit of anxiety around this idea of changing a brand. But as I said earlier, it is something that you can do as long as you have the supporting branding that's going to help explain that story, explain that brand personality, and take your customers into the future with you. So there's lots of different ways you can approach typefaces, and they can mean a lot of things. You can use them instead of a graphic icon or a logo mark. When it comes to using typefaces, something from the graphic side of things that we advise is don't use too many. This is a little excerpt from a brand guidelines that we created for one of our clients, and there's actually quite a few pages of this. But one of the things that we try and guide people towards is thinking about using that typeface and that font for your brand, but using something slightly different for your body copy and for your headlines and your displays. You want your body copy to be easily readable, something that maybe people that have got dyslexia can find easy to read, as well as those that haven't. We can use different weights, so we can use light and we can use bold. We can use lots of different types of typeface and font, but within those particular stylings to pull out different types of areas. The other thing that you want to consider is when you're buying a font, you need to make sure you've got a license to use it. And a mistake that a lot of people make is because the graphic designer has the font license, they think that they are entitled to it as well, but actually you can get fined for it. And it is starting to happen more often now because the internet makes things a lot more accessible. So we might turn to free fonts. And in that case, just a little word of warning, make sure you check the glyphs. The glyphs are those symbols, question marks, ampersands, pound signs, and brackets. There has been occasions in the past where we've used a free font and then suddenly realized at the 11th hour that we've not got some brackets or an ampersand that we needed. And we've had to go off and try and pinch one from another font and try and make it look similar. And it can cause a lot of stress, especially if you're working to a deadline. So just think about those things when it comes to a font, and make sure if you're employing a designer that you understand what the name of the font is so you can find it yourself, but you can also get the license for it. And then just a word on emails. It's been the case in the past where people have put all kinds of quirky fonts into their emails, sent them across to somebody, and then found that the formatting's been completely thrown out because it's converted it into Times New Romans. So when you're thinking about email, try and choose one of the standard fonts that's quite close to one of your other fonts that you're using, because they are limited because of the nature of all the different platforms, from Gmail to Outlook to Microsoft Office. You know, there's lots of different types there. So there tends to be 3 or 4 that are standard and safe to use across. This is all about keeping your brand consistent so that you've not got one person putting it out in Comic Sans and another person putting it out in, you know, some kind of Greek looking font as well. So we're trying to get that brand consistency across there. Now, when it comes to images, this is a big part of a brand. What you use on your brochures, your website, your advertising, your social media is a really big part of that. We are a very visual nation, a race really, and we're seeing, especially going back to the data, that people are engaging with video much more, and I think it's 67% success rate in terms of sales, which is way higher than your standard imagery. So when we think about it, a picture paints 1,000 words. Be very careful with the kind of imagery that you choose. And you can get these images from all kinds of places. Stock is a really good example that we'll start with. If you're choosing stock, there's tons of great stock libraries out there, from Getty to Adobe Stock to Shutterstock, etc. But be really careful what you choose, because they're absolutely riddled with cliches and cheesy metaphors. There's lots of overused graphics, as you probably recognize the handshake up there and the call center operative. There's that kind of cheesy American approach, lots of white teeth, big smiles and thumbs up sort of gestures. It can come across as impersonal. It doesn't really necessarily tell the story of your brand. So think about what kind of imagery you want to use. Do you want to use something close up, a bit more intimate, if you're a kind of personal service type of brand? Do you want to use something that's more abstract, that's very stylish, so it's eye-catching and gets people's attention? If you're choosing a set of images, don't just choose one and then come back later and try and choose another. Think about collecting a set so that you can use them across all sorts of different media and have that consistency. Maybe it's using images that are the same temperature, so they've got the same kind of warmth or coolness, the same kind of color balance. This is all stuff that's going to help you present yourself more professionally, and they can be used really effectively. But a word of warning for you, don't just nick them off Google. We've had 3 clients that we've worked with that have taken something off Google and used it in their advertising or used it on their website, and they've had a letter come through the post from someone like Getty that's given them £1,000 bill for an image that they've been using without license. And this is something that is very common nowadays, because there's a tool out there called reverse search, which you can tap into Google. You can upload an image and it will go and find where that image is being used across the internet. So just be careful. We advise all of our clients this, and you don't want to get yourself a nasty fine in the post. Stock imagery can be really, really powerful, and it can be a cost-effective way of building a bank of images that you can use across your branding and your marketing. But let's look at some other approaches. Nowadays, everybody's got a camera phone, and these camera phones are brilliant, 20 megapixels, even getting up to 100 megapixels on some models. So everybody's now a photographer, as we see across Instagram and across Facebook and all these different platforms. We see loads of people taking really good photos, actually. But there is a skill, and the professionals do add a certain element, but I'll come to them in a minute. The image that you can see on the left-hand side of the food laid out on the table was actually taken by Andy's wife. She does cooking from home and then freezes it and sells it to the local area. It's a great little business. And what she wanted to do is convey that nice presentation of the dishes that she creates. So all she did was she used the natural light that was available to her, a couple of lamps from around the house, and she just spent a bit of time creating a shot, putting the right kind of props in there, getting the lighting, having a little tinker with where she put the different lamps, and used the natural light from the kitchen window. And she used her iPhone and took the shot from above and created a brilliant shot. It is perfectly acceptable to do this nowadays, because you'll have the kind of technology available that enables you to do it. But just make sure that you tell the story, make sure that you bring it to life, make sure you're consistent in your approach, and you've got that very agile ability to create images on demand as you need them. What a professional photographer will bring to you is that extra element of creativity and interpretation of your brief. So have a really good chat with them if you're commissioning a photographer. Tell them what you're trying to achieve with it, where you're going to use it. They'll think about things like leaving enough space for text to overlay, which is often something that a novice will find difficult. They won't necessarily consider some of those small details. But more than that, a professional can help you bring something to life. They can help you give a feeling across in a particular image. This ice cream shot is something that we did for a French ice cream company that was selling at a trade level to chefs. And so we started to articulate this idea that we'd use the ice creams like an artist would use paints. And we wanted to give that feeling across that this was a very high-end connoisseur's ice cream, something that they could use to make wonderful dishes that were far beyond the ice cream itself. So we wanted to position it similar to wine or whiskey or coffee, that connoisseur level. We used an intimate kind of shot. It was actually shot on a kitchen table in Wigan, using just a few professional lights. But the problem with ice cream is it melts really quickly under lights, so it's very difficult to shoot. So by using a professional photographer, by talking with them and explaining what we were trying to achieve, they knew how to get the shot set up really quickly and use the lights to get that really juicy and sumptuous and tasty ice cream across in a visual communication. So there's 3 different methods there that you can think about. Obviously, we've got illustration and graphics and animation that can be included in that as well. What we'd encourage you to do is think about what you're using and what kind of story you're going to tell and what kind of narrative is going to support it, so that you can put together a really good communication of your brand. So now we've got a personality, we've got a presentation. It's time to think about how your brand is going to talk to people. And one of the things that often comes up is using straplines. So when we think about straplines, there's 3 different examples we're going to give you here. There's the positioner, establishing yourself as the market leader, the king of, the happiest, the best, the world's favorite. These are all brands that you're probably aware of and would recognize the strapline. But there's a different way to do a strapline as well. And that might be the descriptor. Buy it, sell it, love it. Never knowingly undersold. Doesn't necessarily tell you what they're going to do, but it certainly says something about John Lewis, that they'll always try and match the price. Ronseal, probably the most quoted strapline in history. It does exactly what it says on the tin. People use it to describe their own services. And KFC, finger licking good, gives you that feeling of what it's like to have the chicken. Or we've got the more conceptual, slightly more abstract, a bit more emotive. They'll use some positioning statements, but they'll use descriptors as well. Things like think different. It explains that they're an innovator. They think differently. They're more inventive. L'Oreal, because you're worth it. They're positioning themselves there as quite a high-end brand. And they're really making you feel like this is something that you should treat yourself to. Coca-Cola, you can't beat the feeling. You know, it takes you right to that hot sunny day, that ice cold bottle. You're knocking back the Coca-Cola and you've got that lovely fizz in your mouth and the taste. They're really evoking a sense in there and an emotion. And Tesco, every little helps, which is arguable with Tesco, but you know, they're saying that they put the detail into their service. There's so many of these examples that we can go through. But the trick is don't get too hung up on trying to do everything with your strapline. Choose one aspect that just communicates something that's maybe going to make you a bit different to all the other people that offer a similar service out there. Try and tap into your audience, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they want from this. And maybe you can use that to start to articulate what it is about your brand.
Right. Let's jump into some of the key messages here. So we're going to look at the features, benefits, and calls to action. And it's important to note that you've just got to be that little bit careful on how you differentiate all of these, because lots of people, they get them wrong or they confuse what a feature and a benefit is. And often they try to put everything on a page and get that message out. And it does more harm than good, and ultimately it puts people off. So in terms of features, the question is, what does it do? So, for example, I was in the market to buy a new golf club, a driver, a couple of weeks ago. So I was looking at the features of that particular golf club, and I noticed it had a flexible shaft, it had a bigger head, it had an adjustable head, and it had a really soft grip. So they were the features of that. If we look into the benefits of it, so what problem does it solve? So the features were it had a flexible shaft. The benefit, it gives you more speed. It had a bigger head. So the benefit was I was able to hit the ball a lot further. It had an adjustable head. So I could change the pitch for different weather conditions. So if the wind's blowing into me, I can change it slightly. And then it had a soft grip. So the main benefit was it was more comfortable for me. So how does it enhance user experience? Well, ultimately, I'm gonna play better. I'm going to lower my score and have a much more enjoyable time. So as I've said, it's really easy to get the features and benefits mixed up, because you can just certainly miss out key messages here. But then we get on to calls to action. So essentially people need to be told what to do next. Make it really easy to progress. Don't leave it up to them. We told a story a couple of weeks ago on the first webinar about a cat in a hat on the internet, and I'll just tell it for the people who weren't on that webinar. A company a number of years ago put a picture of a cat wearing a hat on the internet, and just left it at that. Now, everyone thought it was really cute and funny and nice, and loads of people started sharing and engaging with the post. A few weeks later, they put the same picture of the cat in the hat on the internet, only this time they put like, share, and comments. And the engagement was more than 10 times the amount as it was before. So it just goes to show, just make it really easy for them and tell them what to do. Ask for the sale. That's what we're always saying here. Or ask them to comment or like it or share it. You'll just get so much more out of it, and you'll lead people down the route that you want to take them to. Don't leave it to them to do it themselves, because they won't, unfortunately.
So you've got all these messages that you're going to put out there. You're going to tell them what the features are and the benefits and what to do next. And now you might be thinking, well, hang on a second, I've got to write this. How do I write this in a way that communicates my brand? So there's a few examples up on the screen there. Think about the tone of voice. What we often say to our clients is, if you were doing this as a TV advert, or if you were doing this as a radio advert, who would you have voice in it? Would it be somebody that uses lots of different syllables, you know, lots of like 4 and 5 syllable words, somebody very authoritative like Jeremy Paxson, who talks about very formal and serious subjects? Would it be someone more down to earth like Sean Bean with his very broad Yorkshire accent and his gravelly voice? He did the O2 adverts, for example. Would it be something like Nigella Lawson? Would it be somebody that's very sensual and passionate and seductive about the way they talk about their subject? Or would it be a bit more informal, a bit silly, a bit funny? That's subjective, with Keith Lemon, using that sort of more common vernacular. The language that you use is really important in the way that you write and the way that you communicate with your audience. You should be on their level. Don't talk down to them. You know, there's lots of different ways to present this. When we're going to give you some examples of this, this is a tone of voice document that was given by EA Games to their writing team, particularly around emails. So when they're going to write their emails out to their customers, they really wanted to get in the mindset. So in this particular context, we're talking about FIFA, and they really set the stage. You know, they make it the beautiful game. They even use different size of fonts and different colors and caps and lowercase to really bring this, you know, to bring it to life. It's a very immersive world when you're gaming, when you're playing football. You know, there's a lot of banter. It mimics the actual real game itself, because it is the same pretty much. So they think about their audience. They think about how much they care, how much passion they've got. They want to inspire them. They want them to make them feel like Ronaldo on the pitch. And that's what they do in the copy. They want to put them in that actual world, on the center spot. They bring it to life with, you know, of the greatest stadiums and the greatest clubs in the world. It's magical. Come on, get stuck in. They really bring it to life. They've got you there as well. It's like your best mate holding a footy shouting, "You coming or what?" You know, they really start to make you feel passionate about what you're going to write to them and how they want to be communicated to. They paint that picture of the fans in the stadium. You can hear it. You're immersed in it. I'm certainly there. The call to action, the piercing kick-off whistle that raises the roof and lights the spark under a tinderbox of colour and passion. You know, they're going quite far, you know, to paint this picture here. And the greatest thing in the world, football, they're really making it a religion almost. And that's how they want to talk to people. That's how they want their writers to communicate with their customers. Another example, slightly different context, but this is for Medal of Honor. As you probably can guess from the imagery there, it's a war game, a shoot 'em up. And so a very different tone of voice for you here. The customers are not players, they're elite tier 1 soldiers. They're setting that scene straight away, immersed in an intense battle experience that's authentic in every way. You know, these guys are wearing a headset often when they're playing these games. They're playing with teams online. They're actually having to communicate like a soldier would. because they're mimicking that exact behavior. To that extent, the copy could be like a clipped voice of a commander across the radio, or a comrade shouting across gunfire, that kind of thing. They're immersing themselves in that world again. They're building the world of what the customer's experiencing, and they're mimicking that exact style with the tone of voice in their copy. The kind of words that they use are really important here, using military jargon, but not getting distracted. They're still keeping to their objective, which is to help them buy more, or to help them feel immersed and feel that brand loyalty. They use "is that clear" in caps in big font at the end. Your headlines should be urgent, like emergency dispatches, and your call to actions should be emotive, but orders nonetheless. They're really bringing this to life, and whether people realize it or not, they're buying into this tone of voice. If it wasn't right, then they would feel something's a bit off. They might not be able to articulate it, but they certainly would feel, I don't feel any empathy towards this brand. I don't feel compelled towards them. They're not a brand I want to engage with. Emma's just given an example on the chat that Sean Bean put her off O2. Well, that's fair enough. Maybe that wasn't the tone of voice, and maybe you're not the kind of customer for them. That's their loss. But these are all ways that you can be more exciting than your competitors and more compelling.
Thanks, Ben. So whether you like it or not, branding is a gut feeling, and it's not what you say, it's what they think, what your customers think. And we all know what everyone's like. People tend to make snap judgments, whether they like someone or a brand, or dislike someone, or they're sitting on the fence or they're unsure. So I suppose it's like the first 30 seconds of an interview, or first 3 minutes of an interview. You kind of made your mind up whether that person's right for your business, or even not sitting on the other side of the fence where that company's right for me. And these snap judgments go on in branding as well. It could be like meeting a suitable partner. Do you have common ground with them? Are your interests aligned with them? People make decisions on all the different ways in which you presented your brand. So try and think like a potential client. And a good way to do this is looking at the problem, or looking at the brand from the outside in. What is it that you want to hear? We then can look at brand health and the reputation side of things. So what are people saying about you out there? Do you have plenty of reviews? Are they good reviews or bad reviews? Are you following them up? On your social channels, what are your followers saying about you? Do you have any particular brand ambassadors who just, love your products or services? Are you tapping into that? What are the media saying about you? What is the overall perception of your brand when you look at it from the outside in? And then we can look at share of voice as well. So this is essentially how much you're seen. Where are you seen? Are you getting the right coverage in the right places? Are you doing any advertising? And all of these things, whatever you're doing, are they appropriate to your industry? Are they in the areas where your customers are looking? Because if not, it's pretty much a waste of time. So it's how your brand presents itself within these areas which will make you stand out. Got an example now of Joey from Friends. I don't know if you remember this episode, if there's any fans out there, but there was a Porsche just parked on the street for a few days, and he loved Porsches, and he basically wanted to own the Porsche so he could chat up women. So he's cleaning it every day, but he just immersed himself in the brand. Now this is a bit far-fetched, but he immersed himself in the brand. He bought everything from the bum bag to the jacket, the hats, the trousers, the gloves, and he was living the brand. So when we talk about stuff like this, it's like your team are the first ambassadors. Your friends, your family, how you present yourselves. It's living the brand. And that can be anything from the way you answer your phone. There was a company in Manchester called True North, and they answered their phone not in the normal way, which is "Hello, True North." They were answering the phone, "This is True North," and they were trying to establish a sense of grandeur and excitement. Your brand can be everywhere, and it's all about how you talk to people, how you present yourselves, and how you communicate is what's going to resonate with people.
As we said earlier on, right at the beginning, in fact, people can be brands in their own right. And that includes yourselves. You're the representative of your company, perhaps, or maybe somebody else's. Make sure that they get some kind of media training, or they at least think about how they represent your brand. And that can be your team as well as yourselves. So let's take Richard Branson, for example. You know, he's very much the spirit of adventure. He's got the punk spirit of virgin, disruptive, somebody that will take a risk. You know, he's doing things like flying hot air balloons around the world, or nowadays he's trying to take commercial flight into space. He's not somebody that's afraid to try something different, to try something impossible even. And that's very much the spirit of Virgin. If you read his book, he was always talking about people like British Airways dominating the UK market for airlines. So he thought, right, I'm going to have a go at this. And Virgin Atlantic was born. So he's got that spirit. He lives the brand, and he very much represents them in that respect. And generally speaking, he's loved for it. I'm sure there's probably haters out there as much, though. Let's think about the negative side of things now. Mike Ashley, owner of Sports Directs. You know, he's obviously very competent at what he does, very successful, but the way that he conducts himself can give a real negative aspect to the business. You know, using text messages to let people go, 0 hour contracts. He's got, you know, that poor treatment of staff. He's got the image of a ruthless, greedy fat cat. And to that extent, it puts people off the brand. So when you're thinking about this yourselves, think about how it is that you conduct your brand. What do you represent? Do you live it, or are you slightly cynical? Are your team turning up to network events? Maybe they're not feeling it. Are they representing the brand the way you want them to? How do you get the team on board with that brand? And we'll go back to what Andy said. The branding starts from within. It's not a veneer that you put on the front, a shop front, or just a bit of presentation. It's everything. And if you want your team to buy into that, bring them on board with the process. Let them feel some buy-in. Let them feel like they've contributed. What does it mean to them? What is it that's drawn them to this beyond obviously getting paid? Why do they want to be here? And that really starts to build that cohesive brand around maybe a central set of values. So then you can really start to live the brand. So we're almost there, actually, almost up to the questions point. But just before we finish, you might be thinking, right, okay, this is great, but it's a bit too much. I don't think I want to go this far. I'm quite happy with just a logo, a typeface, and some colours. Thanks very much. And that's fine. You know, do as much or as little as you feel you want to do. What we wanted to give you that feeling of is why brands with personality do better. And hopefully we've given you some of those components, some of those tools, and some of those considerations to put into your brand. Whether you want to be Brewdog or whether you want to be Virgin, it doesn't matter. Whether you just want to be the best in your local area, the best shop on your street. But what we'd say here is don't ignore the power of branding. Don't just make bold statements that you can't back up. You've got to be it. So I'm going to tell you a story now about 3 butchers on a street in Glasgow. Let's give you that sort of micro version of this. So there's 3 butchers on this street in Glasgow, and of course they're all competing for customers that come down the street. And the first butcher decides, right, I'm going to put an A board out. I'm going to do some marketing, and I'm going to say I'm the best butcher in the country. I'm not sure how he justifies this. Has he been round every butcher in the country and decided that he's the best? What's his data behind this? I think customers might start to feel that's not quite a justifiable statement. But the next butcher sees it and thinks, right, I better up my game here. I better go one up on him. So he puts his board out and he says, I'm the best butcher in the world, which is ridiculous. Now, why is a customer going to resonate with that, really? The third butcher kind of looks at these 2 things and thinks, well, yeah, I suppose I better do something as well. But he thinks about what they've said and he's like, well, where do I go next? Is it the best butcher in the universe? That is really ridiculous. So he just pairs it right back. He thinks about what's realistic. He thinks about what's justifiable. And he shows a bit of humility in there as well. And as a result, he got all the customers. So make it contextual. Think exactly about who it is that you're talking to. Don't make outlandish statements that you can't justify. But certainly do have a go at doing some branding and some marketing, because if you do, the likelihood is that you're going to engage with your customers and put more of a compelling presentation of who you are and what you do across to people. And people do buy into brands with personality. So thanks for listening. We hope that was really useful for you.